Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Let's start with the crazy. Let's jump right in with the crazy Warren Davidson, congressman from Ohio, the southwestern side of the state. Down just above Columbus, John Boehner's old district, evidently today compared the COVID vaccine mandates to the Holocaust. He tweeted out, let's recall that the Nazis dehumanized Jewish people before segregating them, segregated them before imprisoning them, imprisoned them before enslaving them, and enslaved them before massacring them. A lot of Democrats not thrilled with that. A lot of folks not thrilled in Congress, and rightfully so. You've got a guy who clearly looking to get his name out there. I honestly had never heard of Warren Davidson before. No legislation to speak of, no policy chops, nothing of interest really. But he got his name in the paper. Look at this. Good for him. And this is kind of where you go, this is where the Republican Party has lost their mind. I looked up the guy's record, really nothing. He's a nothing congressman with no record, really. And you go, this is the current party. Which is why today, for some reason, today was the day a lot of people slammed my email box with, have you seen this? And evidently, our military is going to engage in a couple of week-long training exercise. It is called Robin Sage. I don't know what Robin Sage means, but this is the name of the exercise going to be going on, I guess, from the 22nd of January through February the 3rd. Going to take over probably a good portion of North Carolina. And the goal, I guess, in this is that they're going to practice on how to deal with illegitimate governments. They're going to deal with trying to overthrow an illegitimate government. Or as they put it, Robin Sage is the U.S. military's premier unconventional warfare exercise and the final test of a year's worth of training for aspiring Special Forces soldiers. Candidates are placed in an environment of political instability characterized by armed conflict, forcing soldiers to analyze and solve problems to meet the challenges of this real-world training. Now, they're asking for people in North Carolina to become volunteers, to be like play actors, to help the soldiers, are you a good one or are you a bad one? And it kind of makes you go, hold on. Does this seem like somebody's preparing for, I don't know what could happen in, let's say 2024? Is this something that our military is going, maybe we should start worrying about the crazy people with guns who are basically all over the country and have this rabid idea of, the defeated former guy got cheated. And you hear it in the social media that they're willing to take up arms for him. Is this the military going, we should probably prepare? Maybe we don't want to get caught with our boots off. Maybe just a thought. And you go, but Rick, it's not that bad. Oh, yes, it is. Arizona this weekend, I guess there's going to be a big rally. The defeated former guy has got a big rally scheduled. And one of the special speakers who's going to be there, one of the special guests, is an Arizona state representative, a guy named Mark Fincham. And Fincham, going to address the faithful. He's a QAnon guy. Yeah, he's one of those who repeatedly shared the Q kookery, social media. He's done Q kook podcasts. He's been all over the platforms. He was one of the headliners at the Las Vegas Kookathon. All that stuff. He's been on stage with the pillow guy, all kinds of stuff. He's In Arizona, he's kind of the Q King kook. He's going to be there as well. And I understand, and this is where it gets fun for me. Evidently, they're pimping the idea that there's going to be live entertainment. And I can't actually believe someone reported this, but Michael Jackson, Prince, Whitney Houston, Janis Joplin, Tupac, and John Lennon. And I'm going, Tupac, really? Okay, maybe they just threw that out there and let's get Tupac back because he's gonna be right in line with the white supremacist movement. But this is the kind of thing that's insane to me because they're going, well, JFK Jr. is coming back, and I wonder if there's still somebody wandering around Dealey Plaza waiting for JFK Jr. to come back, because if you remember, they were there, hundreds of them. And that's what scares me. And this is why you can't really have decent things, why we can't have nice things in this country, because so many weirdos. I mean, you go, geez, oh man, where do you get this? And you go, this is why our economy is so badly screwed up. This is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't address real problems, because we got to worry about what the kooks are doing. The well-armed, crazy lunatics who believe JFK Jr. is coming back to be Donald Trump's vice president. And you go, do you understand anything about politics? Do you not understand that JFK Jr. would not, under any circumstances, be in the same political, ideological realm as a Donald Trump? Do you get that? And the answer is no. The answer is no. It just sounds like a great conspiracy. Boy, we can make this up. And again, this is why we can't get anything done, because we're so busy worried about the crazy people. And here's the thing that gets me. And this is the other scary part of this. My home, the place where I grew up, Cleveland, Ohio. The Cleveland Plain Dealer, the big newspaper there, ran an editorial begging the current Republican governor, who is not a great leader, but he's not a crazy Republican. He's not crazy. He's just a Republican. He announced he was going to retire. He's not going to run for re-election. And the Cleveland Plain Dealer is begging him to run for election. Please run for re-election. And this is what they wrote. Otherwise, if he doesn't run for re-election, otherwise, the ugliness that is the Republican primary for your seat will continue its cavalcade of intemperate, cruel, ill-judged, narrow-minded, and explosive rhetoric designed to divide, not unite. Otherwise, the majority of candidates from your party will continue to spew their lies about the 2020 election, lies that just bust apart hopes to rebuild any consensus in America, but also that continue to shred the very heart and soul of the traditional conservative Republican Party values you have served so ably over your long career of public service. I'm going to doubt that part, but they're going, please, you've been bad, and a lot of people in Ohio are not happy with you, but you're better than what's coming. And I look at what's happening in Pennsylvania. You've got a Senate race coming up here and a governor's race where you've got crazy people coming from all over the country moving in. You got a TV guy. You got Dr. Oz moving from New Jersey to Pennsylvania. You got a millionaire coming from Connecticut going to move in. And we're going to have billionaire bingo to decide who are our elected leaders. And all along, things are not going to get better for working people. And I keep coming back to this. The reason we can't have nice things is because we've got crazy people running the asylum. And at some point, we've got to put down the insanity. At some point, we've got to, the rest of us have got to decide, no, we can't deal with you right now. We've got fires to put out. We've got lives to make better. And this is why elections matter. And this is why I come back to, Joe Biden gave that speech in Georgia about making sure that everyone has the right to vote. Republicans are doing everything they can do to rig the rules. And they have been doing it for decades. While saying, Democrats are cheating. It always amazed me. It's one of those things I learned in school. The one who's pointing his finger and screaming the loudest, going, he did it, is generally the one who did it. Or as my mother always said, if you point one finger at somebody else, you got three back at you. That's them. And you go, but Rick, how did they cheat? You go back to 2000, a real stolen election. When you look at the fact that Catherine Harris, the Secretary of State, certified that election before the votes were even counted. And how before the election even happened, they had purged 90,000 people off the voting rolls who just happened to have names that, sounded like, certain people of color who generally vote for Democrats. But that wasn't cheating. It was just playing the game. And they had a Secretary of State who was willing to go along, which is why there's so much money going into races where you elect your secretaries of state. The guy in Georgia is raising, that Rafton-Parger, raising tons of money. But the kook running against him, raising tons more. Because the thing that Trump got, you got to have people who are willing to break the law on your side. Which is why I found it interesting, the Politico story, that it came out yesterday that Michigan had submitted a false certification of electors. What happens, and it happens where I live in Pennsylvania, it happens in every state. On a certain day, all of the electors go to the Capitol. They all cast their ballot for who they were elected to cast their ballot for, and then they certify. It's all ceremonial because it's all mostly taken care of. And then they sign it off and they send it off to the National Archives, and then it's processed and it goes to Congress, and there's a whole process. But it's mostly ceremonial. In places like Michigan and in Wisconsin and in Arizona, evidently, and I kind of remember these stories from back then that they were trying it. I didn't know that they actually had done it. But I remember that they were holding their own separate events. But they actually submitted the documents as Trump had won Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And I think Rachel Maddow hit it on the head by saying, is this legal? I mean, is it legal that they do that? And who helped them to do this? How did they get along in that process? And then how many other states are willing to do this? And is this something that we now have to worry about? Because, look, as one woman was quoted by a newspaper in Arizona, the Arizona Republic, she said, we seated before the legislature here. We already turned it in. We beat them to the game. So basically, her philosophy was, if we hurried up and we certified before the actual certification happened and we turned it in, we beat you to it. Yours doesn't count. Nah. It's kind of like, if you ever saw the Eddie Izzard thing, we put a flag in the ground. Do you have a flag? And you go, but that's not how this works. What is wrong with you people? But this is the kind of stuff that these folks are willing to try and pass off. Now, unfortunately, the National Archives caught it. They sent a letter back to the Arizona Secretary of State, said, hey, these are forgeries. We're not accepting them. That kind of stuff. But you go, shouldn't someone go to jail over this? Isn't this one of those moments where you go, that's illegal? Someone should be held accountable. And all of this from January 6th forward, there are a handful of people who are going to jail, but it's taking way too long. Way too many people are walking around scot-free going, it must have been legal. Nobody's coming for me. Especially the people at the top. Now, the interesting thing to me is, there are some Republicans now trying a little bit to push back. You saw Mike Rounds, Senator Rounds from South Dakota saying, they went through it. Trump lost. It was what it was. You have McConnell coming out saying, I think Senator Rounds told the truth about what happened in 2020 election. He agrees with him. So that's Mitch McConnell saying Biden won, which he has done before. So going to be interesting to see what happens with the party as we move forward on this issue. Because understand, in all of the races across the country where they elect secretaries of state, there is a crazy person who believes that 2020 was stolen. And a crazy person with lots of money. So the question then becomes, let's say they start electing them. Will we have to worry about forged documents? And this is why I keep going, Democrats. Let's start moving this stuff around. Move this hearing along. That's why today I'd love to find out what was said with ex-Trump White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. who did a virtual interview with the January 6th Commission. I would like to know what was there. Hopefully that will come soon. We also find the January 6th Committee has requested time with Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. I think that very important. I fully expect him to do the Jim Jordan and the Scott Perry. And again, I want to know why Scott Perry, my congressman, has not been subpoenaed. I want to know why they haven't forced him to come and sit. And look, you want to plead the fifth, that is your choice. But you should have to be in that seat. If it were you, if it were me, or any one of us, you know where we'd be sitting? In that seat. And he should, without question, be there as well. And this is where, it just keeps bringing me back to how much of this do we have to put up with? How much of this do we as the working class of this country, who gets up every day, works hard, plays by the rules, and gets screwed constantly? This is the uniting part of all this. All the sideshows, all the kookery, all the nonsense, all of this stuff is meant to distract and divide and pit us against each other so that we don't do what needs to be done, and that is chuck half these bums out. And then maybe we could have a functional representative democracy. We could have people on both sides of the aisle going, yeah, we shouldn't have kids who go to bed hungry every night. Yeah, we shouldn't have homeless veterans. Yeah, every American deserves the best health care that we can get them. Everyone deserves the best education they can get. And an education as far as their talents will take them without a lifetime full of debt. This is common sense stuff, but the reason we can't have any of this, we're still fighting over who can go to which bathroom. We're still fighting over if two people can love each other in the confines of their own four walls without Karen next door going crazy about it. I mean, we're really we're in bizarre moments. And until we start putting this noise aside, it's going to continue. They're going to continue to feed us this outrage candy. They're going to continue to feed us this kind of red meat that keeps us all, marching in Dealey Plaza looking for JFK Jr. 20 years after he's been dead. Wow. Crazy, crazy times. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Alex Press, labor reporter at Jacobin Magazine. We're going to be here to share some thoughts on what's going on out in Denver. Stick around. Right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt established the National War Labor Board under Executive Order 9017. The board was designed to mediate and settle disputes in the various defense industries. Its purpose was to prevent any strikes or lockouts that would interfere with war production. The War Labor Board consisted of 12 representatives, 4 each from industry, labor, and the public. It established procedures for dispute resolution and detailed the scope of grievances, arbitration, and award enforcement. The board had the authority to issue binding agreements and to recommend government seizures of plants involved in work stoppages. It instituted the Little Steel formula to allow for cost of living increases in an effort to stem inflation. In exchange for the No Strike Pledge, it instituted maintenance of membership in unionized workplaces, which made union membership automatic for new hires and mandated employer collection of union dues. During the war, it imposed tens of thousands of wage dispute settlements and wage agreements. In a 1942 case against General Motors, the board mandated equal pay for equal work for women and minorities. Those critical of the board opposed the No Strike Pledge and compulsory arbitration as clampdowns on labor's power and independence. They argued it was stacked with open shop advocates, enforced wage controls and freezes, and encumbered workers with endless red tape, runarounds, and delays in resolutions. Labor historian Steve Frazier notes that after the 1942 elections, pro-business appointees made union organizing efforts throughout the South and in the retail and service sectors difficult. The board ceased its functions at the end of 1935, though it set precedents for arbitration that are still in use today. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, quick shout out to the folks at the Art Institute of Chicago. Employees there have won their union. A majority of the workers, 142, voted yes, 44 no. And they are going to vote. They are going to begin to bargain on a contract, and good for them. As the one person said, not only that they got the union, they voted to form one bargaining unit for all the museum titles, because together they are stronger. And absolutely, I agree, and good on them. Also, some good news for the New York Times tech workers, the tech workers. They're going to get a unionization vote starting, I think, sometime this month. According to the NLRB regional director, that's going to happen. And good. I'm hoping the best for them, and that will help go forward. Some news now. Evidently a strike in Denver. Thousands of Kroger workers there in the Denver area went on strike. As most things, better wages, hours, conditions, safety on the job, a big part of it. And evidently the last, best, and final offer by Kroger, kind of a slap in the face from what I'm reading. And here to share some thoughts on what's going on in the Denver area at the King Soopers supermarket stores there in Colorado. I've asked Alex Press to come talk with us. Alex is a staff writer over at Jacobin magazine. She does incredible work where she's written the most recent piece. A horrifying report shows the miserable working conditions at Kroger couldn't be better timed. Alex, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me as ever, Rick.
So, how bad? I mean, yeah, I listened to some of the stories of the workers who went on strike, and I guess there are several thousand of them that have gone out. How bad is it?
So it's really bad. So that report came out, with incredible timing, given that this strike has happened in Colorado starting today at 5 a.m. So that report was done surveying over 10,000 workers over the summer of 2021. And the numbers are crazy. So 14% of respondents either were homeless or had been homeless in the past year. And more than 3/4 of the workers are food insecure, right? So they either skip meals, they reduce the size of meals, they aren't sure if they can feed their families. And lots of them, 36%, worry about being evicted. They're not paying rent on time, they're not paying their mortgages. And when I spoke to the president of UFCW Local 7, which is the local that is now on strike, she immediately mentioned a worker who had worked at a Kroger-owned store for 12 years and was currently living in a shelter. So things are very bad. These jobs once paid a decent wage. They are union jobs, and a mixture of declining union power, maybe criticisms within the UFCW itself about how it fought on this. But also Kroger is just brutal intransigence around paying workers. It's decreased their wages for decades. Their real wages have gone down. And so what once were livable jobs now are part-time, very flexible and low-paid jobs.
Now remember, and I got to focus on this for a moment because we're still in the pandemic, so to speak. These were the frontline heroes. These were the patriots who helped keep us fed during the shutdown. These were the people who got up and went to work every day, and we were patting them on the back, and we were giving them nice names and platitudes. Not so much in the way of wages, but lots of nice words. And then you find out that a number of them are homeless. They can't feed their families. The jobs are unsafe. In fact, one of the facilities had a shooting not too long ago. It just seems that not so much on the hero front.
Yeah, definitely. And in speaking with workers and with that, the union's local president, Kim Cordova, today, they really emphasized that safety is in fact a big issue as far as these current contract negotiations going on in Colorado with King Soopers, that the company has no interest in laying out money for safety and concerns, not just about COVID, which obviously is a concern, right? As you mentioned, these are workers who interact with the public at a mass number, have been there day in and day out. And so they have had more COVID cases and more fatal COVID cases than the average worker. But actual physical safety, in the sense of, it was a King Soopers in Boulder that was the site of a mass shooting not that long ago. And actually the local president today told me about a store that had been getting called in threats about someone coming in to shoot up the store. And there was no communication with the other workers, right? So the workers answering those phone calls knew about these threats, but the company was not communicating with the other workers in the store. And so people didn't even know. It was evacuated a few times, but it was really up to the company to decide whether these were credible threats. So workers are very concerned.
Yeah, no, I got to tell you, if it's me, I'm not. If I'm in that situation, I'm probably not as worried about COVID as I am Karen. You got all these crazy people, and I see all these videos of these people losing their minds at cashiers and service workers, and I'm going, there's no way I would put up with that kind of abuse, and no worker should ever have to.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and the other big issue here, it's traditional economic issues. There's a wage differential as far as what the workers say they need and what the company is proposing in that last offer. So the company is proposing that a wage floor be $16 an hour, which, Denver's current minimum wage law is $15.87. So Kroger is generously offering 13 extra cents. Workers are disgusted by that. There's healthcare issues, but really something important to state here about this strike is the workers say this is an unfair labor practices strike, right? So they are saying that they're on strike because the company has been bargaining in bad faith. Specifically, the union local president today, Kim, told me that one of the big issues that they filed these charges around is that the company isn't providing necessary information, necessary data that they need to cost out their proposals, right? So the company won't say how many hours people are working, what the sales numbers are. And so the company, is preventing the union from actually being able to bargain. It's also, sort of not taking the bargaining seriously itself. It's not looking at the union's proposals. The guy who runs the division, who is the president of King Soopers, has spent 9 minutes at the bargaining table total over all these sessions. He came in, he said hello, and then he left.
Well, he's too busy spending his money.
Yes,
because
exactly.
I was looking, I'm looking at the pay for 2021, and this Rodney McMullen, I guess his name is $22.2 million, which what'd you put it at? 909 times that of the person who's actually doing the work and making the profit and helping that company be successful. He's doing one guy getting the pay of 909 people for basically sitting on his behind moving money from one pocket to the next.
Yeah. So to clarify, it's Joe Kelly who is at the bargaining table. He's the head of that division of the King Soopers supermarkets. But yes, the CEO of Kroger, who you mentioned, I mean, he got his pay bumped by millions of dollars right after the company ended hazard pay for workers. It only did hazard pay of $2 an hour for a month and a half, as if the virus had ended by May of 2020. It had not. And then just after they ended that, this guy gets even more money. And the responses, from workers in that survey are pretty damning. So that, it's not going unnoticed that this company has more inequality than even, some of the worst other companies in this country. We're very used to the idea that a CEO gets paid hundreds of times more than his average worker. But Kroger is bad even by those incredibly bad standards we already have, right? So one worker said, in their response to this survey, Rodney McMullen can afford helicopters and yachts, and I will be homeless when my parents die. Those are that one worker responded to the survey that they had not eaten in 3 days. These are workers who are surrounded by food. Yeah. They're providing food. They're making sure the public has food. And meanwhile, they can't afford to eat. And Kroger gives them, a minuscule discount that excludes produce, which is really a slap in the face. And so they're sharing food amongst each other. They're borrowing money from family. They're going to food banks and relying on SNAP benefits. So it's a really horrible situation. And it's important to note that Kroger, because it owns all these brands like King Soopers, it is in fact the largest grocery chain in the United States and the fourth largest private employer in the United States. So we're talking about 500,000 people working.
How come we never hear about this? I mean, this is the second largest retailer behind, food retailer behind Walmart, as you point out. Right. We always hear about Walmart. We always hear about the abuses there. How come Kroger seems to get a pass? Is it because a number of their workers are unionized and maybe that's not a focus? What do you think that is?
I think that might be part of it. It might also be the fact that it hides behind all these other brands, right? So people don't necessarily identify Ralph's with the same company as a Kroger. These are all owned by the same company, though. I think it's also true that sort of people do pick the biggest villain of the day and focus on that. But I really couldn't tell you why these workers aren't getting the amount of attention that I think they deserve. Their pay is not as bad as a fast food worker, right? The average Kroger employee makes something like $18 an hour. So in that sense, it might be that people think, well, that's not that bad a pay, right? It's above minimum wage. But when we look at the effects for 500,000 people of this kind of work, the fact that they're increasingly only letting them work part-time, right? Even though these employees want to work full-time, you can't make a living even if you make 18 if you're only getting 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
And it's very unpredictable scheduling. It makes it hard to get a second job, not that you should have to. And so these things add up, right? And it's very good, I think, that this report was done, which was an incredible feat in itself, getting 10,000 workers to respond. And the workers in Texas almost went on strike similarly in the way Colorado's workers have today. So I think more power. Every company like this deserves to have criticism put towards it. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this now.
Yeah, and the hope is while these workers are on strike, that nobody crosses their picket line. There are other stores, go there for the time being. Put some pressure on this company to get to the table and negotiate in good faith. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Alex Press. Alex, a staff writer over at Jacobin magazine. She got her most recent piece out on a survey done about the Kroger workers. It's titled "A Horrifying Report Shows the Miserable Working Conditions at Kroger." We'll get links out on social media on how you can take a look at that. I look at this and I look at some of these workers, and my grandmother was a UFCW worker for 20 some years back in the 60s, 70s, and into the early 80s, and they made a reasonable living. And my memory of that job, it was a small department store in Cleveland. In 1985, when it shut down, she was making something like $8.50 an hour with 6 weeks vacation, the best health care you could get, a defined benefit pension, all kinds of stuff that we now think, who gets that anymore? Those are days of the past. And when I went to the BLS calculator to take a look at what it would be right around the $22 an hour that they're talking about as a kind of a minimum for these workers. So it seems to me that they're not asking for anything that historically is out of line. They're just trying to rebuild what was the norm of past generations, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the case in so many of these workplace fights that go on. It's the fact that these companies are not going to give a penny more than they are required to give, right? Which is why the strikes are useful, that they're actually forcing them to make a change. But it's absolutely the case that these wages in real numbers have gone down for decades, and the benefits have been gutted, and the schedules have become more flexible, right? People are reporting that they're given a few hours notice before a shift change. These are people with kids, right? And so they have to find childcare. I mean, it's completely impossible now. These jobs in so many ways are worse. And I think, Kroger, we really can say has a well-established pattern of resisting everything, right? So during the pandemic, certain local cities would pass ordinances called hazard pay ordinances, where they said every, quote unquote, hero essential worker gets a very significant pay bump. I think in LA and Long Beach, it was something like $4 an hour during the pandemic. Kroger responded, it lobbied successfully with its industry peers to defeat these ordinances in some cities. And then in the ones where it was passed, they shut down stores entirely. Which is what, we call a capital strike. It's a boss saying, I would rather lose money and lose profits than admit that the public or that anyone other than myself has a say in how I'm running my business. And so Kroger, it's not surprising that they're resisting this so intransigently, and that they, it seemed to be not bargaining in good faith, right? This company is not going to give people even the very fair pay and benefits they're asking for.
It's crazy. And you look at the fact that, the money that they've earned, that these workers have earned for this company, wildly profitable. And you point out in 2020, the operating profits for Kroger was $4.05 billion with a B dollars. And you write that by the end of the third quarter 2021, Kroger had $2.28 billion in cash on hand, up from $399 million in early 2020. So not only did they do really well in 2020, they're doing better in 2021. So and moving forward, they're doing better. So they could share a little. So that whole argument of, in defense of the market, we can't really afford it. Nonsense. They're doing wildly well.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly when you see CEOs' pay going up by millions of dollars, and these stock buyback programs that they've been doing to reward shareholders with greater dividends, it's very insulting. They obviously have the money. The fact that they were so quick to end that hazard pay in less than 2 months, it's insulting, and it's very clear. The stakes are not confusing. They can't cry poverty. So much money that would have gone to restaurants instead went to Kroger during the pandemic. So yeah, this has been a blessing for the company's executives, the pandemic. It has been quite the opposite for everyone who is making their stores run.
Yeah, well, it's a boon for the CEO, the shareholders, the executives, but they're doing it off the backs of the workers and ultimately the consumers. And I'm hoping the folks in Denver will stay away. until this is over. You never cross someone's picket line ever for any reason. There are other places. Go there during this time and send that message. But in looking at this, how much of this is the company's greed? How much of this is just the fact that our policies have harmed unions to the point to where there are very few union grocery stores. There's none in my area, so people don't even think about this anymore. Where do you put some of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think Kroger, like many other companies, has sort of gone on the offensive, especially during the pandemic. They're getting greedy is one way to put it. Things are better than ever, and they don't want to have any sort of give anything back. And so that does piss people off. But I asked that local president, Kim Cordova, today, because it's a tough question. Why are your union shops this bad? Why are union workers living in shelters? Her answer was, she pointed to the fact that the state doesn't have a functioning OSHA anymore, that labor laws have been so gutted that everything is stacked against them. The company has sort of intervened in union elections at Kroger. And so there are many real reasons that aren't just the union's fault, right? And I think it really is the case that just capital has gone on the offensive. But on the flip side, workers have been pushed to the brink. And so that's, yet again, why we're seeing a strike, just as we've been seeing for the past year. Workers who otherwise might have accepted something have said, I have nothing left to lose.
No.
And so
especially in this moment of the Great Resignation, because I'll tell you, I'm surprised they're able to even keep people. Given the stories that we've heard, some 4.5 million people quitting jobs, the fact that these workers have a union, that's the reason they're on strike and they're taking this position. And good on them. I wish them the best. Last question I've got for you: how do we help? How do people help these folks? Is there a strike fund set up yet? Will that come? What are you seeing?
Yeah, there is a strike fund. I'm happy to send it to you so that you can post it for people. The union is also explicitly telling people not to shop at the stores they're on strike, which is I think 78 or 80 stores is across Colorado, and to otherwise support the workers, right? Every worker is glad if you join them on a picket line, but also that strike fund as well. So those are the things they're asking for. And they're asking, of course, as ever, that workers who have their own unions or have their own workplace power keep building that, because every union having a win helps the rest of us, right? And so I think seeing yourself as part of this struggle, these are the places we go to get food, right? These are parts of our community.
Yeah, good. I wish them the best. And if you give me those links, we'll make sure we get them out. Alex,
Sure.
as always, fantastic work. Looking forward to have you back again real soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good night, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Alex Press. Make sure you check out her work over at Jacobin Magazine. We'll get links out on social media. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt reestablished the National War Labor Board, just a little over a month before the United States had entered World War II. In the days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Congress voted to join the global conflict. Soon after the war was declared, the president brought together representatives from both business and labor. The president won commitments of no strikes or lockouts during the conflict. He wanted further assurances, however, that the great industrial war machine would continue to run smoothly. He looked back on how labor disputes were handled during World War I as a model. During that earlier global conflict, President Woodrow Wilson had set up a National War Labor Board. President Roosevelt kept the same name for his board, but charged it with even more sweeping powers. The board consisted of 12 members, 4 from labor, 4 from business, and 4 from the general public. But the overall composition of those selected tilted in favor of business. Any labor dispute that might impact the war effort was sent before the board. Since practically the entire United States economy was part of the war engine, this gave the group significant power. In establishing the board, President Roosevelt declared, "The national interest demands that there shall be no interruptions of any work which contributes to the effective prosecution of the war." The board played a decisive role in setting wages for many workers during the war. Labor protested the hardship of stagnant wages, as the raises determined by the board did not keep up with the cost of living, as prices were driven up by wartime scarcities. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said, a couple weeks ago, I spent a little time in my community hospital. Was there with a relative, and they had split the emergency room in half. Half over here were people who were, obviously in distress, people with broken arms, people with things that you could see. And on the other side of the room, the invisible divide, were all the people who I found out later all tested positive for COVID, all waiting for a room because the hospital was just blown away. In fact, the ER was full of people sitting in chairs in the hallways waiting to be seen in one way or another. And we were there like 8.5 hours for something that should not have taken that long. There were people there for 20 hours. It was ridiculous. And I remember coming out of there going, what is going on with our hospital system? And you find out, look, COVID is taking over. And then the surge happened. And I can't imagine how bad things are now, especially in small town America, which made me think back to a guy we had on talking about a book that was fantastic. And this was before things were bad. So it made me go, hey, I got to reach back out to Brian Alexander, the author of The Hospital, Life, Death, and Dollars in a Small American Town, and talk about how bad is it now. Brian, thanks for taking time for us.
It's a pleasure. It's always good to see you, Rick.
So, I got to tell you, I was thinking about you and the book as I'm sitting in this I live in a fairly small rural community, and the hospital just slammed. There's nowhere to move. There's nowhere to put people. And I'm going, I can't imagine how people are doing in places that don't have the resources that we do, because we've got a pretty good system here. And I can't imagine how it is in most places in real rural America, given the fact that 1 million people a day, 1.3 million the other day, are getting sick, and the number of hospitalizations are just through the roof. So I guess the beginning question is, how bad is it in rural America right now in the hospital system?
It's bad. It is crisis proportions, and it's bad all over. It's also bad in urban centers. I don't want to say it's only bad in rural communities. I was recently in New York, and they had a crisis mainly because staff people were testing positive, and so they didn't have the staff. In rural America, it's the low vaccination rates. It is some staff have left. Staff themselves, as in the urban centers, are coming down with it. And in the hospital that I wrote about in Bryan, Ohio, in rural Williams County, in the far northwest corner of the state, they consider themselves in a crisis situation. People are dying there almost every day, and new cases are showing up almost every day. And most alarmingly, they haven't even reached their peak yet. So this is, and people who need care for other reasons, like God forbid you hit a deer and you need to go to the hospital in Bryan, Ohio, they may not be able to take you. There was a moment about 2 weeks ago when they were doing what was called EMS bypass. In other words, if you weren't literally having a heart attack and dying, they took you as far away as they could get. Wow. Because they couldn't handle you.
And I've been asking that question for a while now. How many people are dying, not from COVID, but from things that could have been treated, could have been helped, but there was no room. We've got all these people in the ICU who are on ventilators, and you got all this, the whole system just packed, and people are waiting. We see an occasional story, but I gotta imagine it's much worse than an occasional story.
Oh yeah, and a lot of these cases and even deaths aren't even necessarily being fully recorded. That's partly because in smaller communities, there may not be a full-time coroner. And if there is a part-time coroner, he may not have the time or the financial wherewithal because of his budget to do a full-on testing procedure on a dead body. So they may say, died of, pneumonia. That may have really been a COVID situation.
Or just the natural causes. They were old, they died. It just was what it was when it could have been. And I've been arguing that as well, that, we're closing in on 800,000 something now. And you go, I got to think it's much worse than that, especially you look at states like Florida that ideologically seem opposed to the idea of reporting. So I got to imagine that it's even worse than what we're being told.
It is. As a public health official in a county in Ohio told me just the other day, he said, all is lost. And when you are a public health official who has been attacked for over 2 years now because you want to do masks, you want to encourage people to get vaccinated, and they've stuck it out and they've stuck it out, and now they are saying all is lost. That's a bad, bad situation.
No, it's horrible. And this is, I go back to the very beginning. And my position from the very start was we've got to do all of these things so that we save our healthcare system from collapse. We don't want to blow it out and have what I saw recently in ours where it's just packed with people and nowhere to go. And then you end up flying, in other directions to try and hopefully find someplace for someone. For me, that was always it. And then you don't want to burn these people out. At some point, you need them. And, the horror stories that I hear, doctors being assaulted, nurses being assaulted, the kind of, just the kind of craziness over the vaccine and over, it's a hoax and give them the horse dewormer and, bring out the Clorox and now the guy drinking urine. Gee, I mean, I can't imagine what these people go through on a daily basis, nor would I want to do it.
Yeah, they feel really unappreciated, Rick. And most of them are just burnt out, the ones that are even still there, because they deal with this all the time. And sometimes they have their own political leadership. In Williams County, a county commissioner sat in front of the public health official and the head of the hospital and demanded to know why they weren't using ivermectin on the patients. I mean, and they tried to explain, look, it doesn't work. But he wasn't going to have any of that explanation. And so to them, it's just like beating their heads against the wall.
No, I'm waiting. I don't know if you saw the story, and I've been making a joke out of it the last couple of days because I don't know what else you do with someone saying that the cure for COVID is drinking urine. I don't know where you go with it. If that is now the cure, I don't know I don't know how you move on from there.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a nephrologist, a kidney doctor on Twitter today saying, please don't drink your urine.
No. See, this is where I'm going to differ from the nephrologist and probably from most people. I've gotten to the point to where we've kept the dim too long. If you're someone who's really going to take a cup of urine and you're really, good for you. Work on that. If you're going to go to the Tractor Supply and grab a handful of the horse dewormer, because if some's good, a lot's better. Knock yourself out. I'm tired of it at this point. I think most Americans are tired of stupid dragging us down because this is part of why things have gotten so bad.
Well, Rick, I empathize with you, and I have to say my own patience really gets worn thin. But I spent a couple of years basically living in Williams County, and I grew up in a small town in Ohio, another small town, Lancaster, Ohio, and I got to say, a lot of these people are victims themselves. They're victims of misinformation, they're victims of lies, they're victims of propaganda, and they are paying for it in some cases with their lives. And so, while I am very tempted to say, hey, one less person I got to deal with, I really fight that because I regard a lot of these people as victims also.
I was there for a very long time. And I look, I want to help people. And I know it's bad for my soul. It's bad for my karma. But at some point, when you keep hearing that what's out there, you keep hearing the evidence, you keep hearing, doctors coming out saying, don't drink the urine, and someone's still going to do it. Don't drink the bleach, and someone still does it. How do you then help them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have my buddy Keith Swihart that I wrote about in the book, The Hospital, diabetic. He's now virtually blind due to his diabetes. He's still a young man. He's only 41 years old. And I call him about every week and I say, how you doing, Keith? And he goes, I'm doing good. And I say, have you been vaccinated yet? And he said, no, I'm still thinking about it. And I say, Keith, you know what I'm going to tell you? He said, I know, but I have people on Facebook. I have people, they're telling me this. And there are a couple of doctors in that community, by the way, that are real Trump acolytes who are giving some bad information too. And so he feels torn between people like me telling him to go get vaccinated and people in his life who are saying, hey, I read this, I saw that. There's so much of it out there. It's really tough on a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that, and I'm hopeful at some point that we all wake up to this. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Brian Alexander. Brian's the author of The Hospital: Life, Death, and Dollars in a Small American Town. You can get this. It's a St. Martin's Press book. We'll get it out on social media, how you can take a look at it. One of the things that I've been saying, Brian, is, we need to build more facilities. What's happened over the years is we've consolidated so many of these hospital systems down, and places like rural communities have been screwed. Emergency rooms have been closed because, falling insurance rates, a whole bunch of stuff. We haven't invested in it. Is there a way forward to maybe when the next pandemic hits, we can be a little bit more prepared? Are there any prescriptions for the future? What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, the big prescription, ultimately, we need a national health plan. Before that, however, we really need to give the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, more power to go after these concentrated health systems. Because you're right, Rick, a lot of these independent community hospitals are really suffering. They're barely making a margin or they are losing money. Meanwhile, the big health systems are making money hand over fist, and they're not investing in some of the very basic stuff. Just the other day in Toledo, Ohio, ProMedica, a big health system, they announced that they're going to be the title sponsor for the USGA U.S. Women's Open, going to be the richest purse. And ProMedica Health Systems is going to spend millions of dollars to do that. Why is a health system supposed to be a nonprofit? Why are they sponsoring the richest women's golf tournament in the world? That doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense. And how do you justify that?
Well, you don't. To me, you don't justify it. But the way you say is, well, we're a nonprofit, and so we are going to get some charity dollars out of that. But what they're really doing is forking over a lot of money for brand recognition that they then use in their for-profit arms. A lot of these nonprofit health systems actually have for-profit businesses.
Yeah.
So the idea of the quote-unquote nonprofit health system is really become a myth in our country.
At what point do we pull that nonprofit status?
Well, that's my feeling. I mean, I've had people object to the way I feel about this and say, look, every business does this. And I say, fine, then tax them like a business. If that's what you're going to do, then they ought to pay taxes like all other businesses do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy. And ultimately, I look at healthcare as something that shouldn't be a profit motive thing anyway. It should be a part of the commons, part of the public good, which is why I do believe in community hospitals. I don't believe in privatization of our healthcare system, which is why we, the taxpayers, should be taking these things on, because it's something we need, like police and fire. We should have these things as part of our commons so that when we need them, they're there. And when we do need them, we don't go broke using them.
Yeah, Jonas Salk did not try to patent the polio vaccine. The Canadian scientists and doctors who isolated insulin sold the rights to it for $1 because they felt that it would be immoral to profit from it. Now insulin can bankrupt a diabetic in our country.
Yeah, well, that's when there was something called morality back then. This concept, when you're talking about money, there's no such thing as moral or immoral. It's about hooray for me and the heck with everyone else. Do you see any movement to get us in that direction, though? I mean, this pandemic should be, a flashing red light to a lot of us on a lot of issues: our manufacturing, supply chains, our production, but also our healthcare system, which, we should be able to get tested as often as possible. These tests should be free and available. We shouldn't be getting gouged by drugstores and Walmart. There's a lot that we should be reclaiming as taxpayers and citizens.
We should be. In fact, I argue in the book, The Hospital, that really what the pandemic did was reveal these big fault lines that we have been papering over for the last 50 years or so. It really revealed them and opened wider chasms in a number of areas: income inequality, what life is like for a meatpacking house worker. These all affect American health. And I think that it's revealed the fragility of our healthcare system and the fact that we have not invested in public health the way that we should have.
Yeah, and for me, it all comes back to the politics. It all comes back to how broken our political system is. Because in any functional democracy, Brian, we would have leaders who are trying to address these issues.
Well, there is some good movement, which is what you asked about. I mean, for example, Gavin Newsom, governor of California, has announced an initiative to basically create nonprofit insulin by having the state go into the insulin business. I've argued for years that the federal government ought to do that for generic drugs. The federal government ought to be making generic drugs and sell them at cost. For whatever it costs to make it, sell that for those, so there's no profit motive off of off-patent drugs, which is really what most drugs are off-patent drugs.
Especially when you look at the fact that our tax dollars go into developing most drugs in this country through the NIH or through the university system that we fund. So at some level, we're paying for it no matter what.
Yeah, well, look what's happening with the dispute over intellectual property for the Moderna vaccine. I mean, Moderna is trying to claim that the federal scientists who worked on the vaccine and helped develop it don't get any credit on that, and they want the intellectual property all for themselves.
What happened to Jonas Salk?
Yeah. Well, Jonas Salk got rich in other ways, but he didn't really get rich off of the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to that. You think about how screwed up our society is. Because look, we should be giving that stuff away to the third world, where all of this stuff is now mutating, and who knows what's coming next because of it. There should be in countries that want the vaccines, and they are there. The people who don't want it here, we should be giving it to them.
And think about what happened last December, a year ago December, when the vaccines finally came out. Everybody, not everybody, unfortunately, but a lot of people, millions of us, stood in line. We sat in our cars on long lines to get this vaccine. Yep. Didn't cost us a dime individually. We all paid for it through our taxes, of course. Yeah. But that was socialized medicine, and America really embraced socialized medicine.
And it worked. Brian, I appreciate the time. Great stuff as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Brian Alexander, author of The Hospital. Make sure you get his book. We'll get links out on social media. Life, Death, and Dollars in a Small American Town. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1932. A very unusual army marched on Washington, D.C. Pro-labor Catholic priest Father James Renshaw Cox led the march. Father Cox had worked as a cab driver and steel worker before attending seminary and serving as a chaplain in World War I. After the war, as a pastor in Pittsburgh, he organized food assistance for those hit hard by the Great Depression. As the number of unemployed grew, Father Cox came up with a new plan to help the suffering in his city. He organized Cox's Army, 25,000 Pennsylvanians who had lost their job due to the Great Depression. Cox led them from Pennsylvania to the nation's capital to demand a works program. Cox led them from Pennsylvania to the nation's capital to demand a public works program to put people back to work. The protest was the largest in Washington, D.C. up until that time. It was considered a great embarrassment to Republican President Herbert Hoover. Yet the president still did not move to provide government assistance. Such inaction helped to usher in the era of Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency, whose New Deal policies included public jobs programs. The protest also spawned a popular saying for women of that day. According to the Associated Press, the men of Cox's Army ate 2,500 pounds of sauerkraut, 1,500 pounds of hot dogs, 11,000 apples, 650 gallons of soup, 450 loaves of bread, and 1,600 dozen of donuts and rolls during the protest. When cooking dinner for their families, women might explain, "I made just enough food to feed Cox's Army." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you got a question, comment, thought, something on your mind, we'd like to hear it. Matt Gaetz, congressman from Florida, and I got to wonder how long a congressman from Florida, evidently an ex-girlfriend on Hell Hath No Fury as an ex, gonna spill the beans, perhaps. Testified before a federal grand jury who is investigating Matt Gaetz on possible sex crimes, whether Gaetz in 2017 had sex with a minor back then, also took her across state lines so that she could engage in prostitution. Oh, that's another crime. In fact, there are 3 things that he is being investigated for: obviously sex trafficking, and violating the Mann Act, which is taking someone across state lines for prostitution, and obstruction of justice. That could be hopefully a long time. And in Florida's got some, now this is federal law, obviously. I'm hoping Florida goes after him too, because they've got some crazy sentence laws. In fact, last night I was reading a couple of stories to my wife where 2 women threw glitter at some guy in his apartment. And it was a little bit more than that. They jumped in his balcony, went in his door, threw it on him. But they're being held on like $75,000 and could face life in prison. Whereas the woman from Florida, another one, evidently took her kid, small child, folded it in half, put it in scalding hot water, and burnt the bottom half of the child, genitals, backside, back, everything, being held on $25,000 and potentially serve a 2-year stint. I don't understand Florida ever. Maybe somebody will explain it to me. But here's the thing. Matt Gaetz still crazy as ever, which is why I think he's been so outward crazy. Is because he keeps running around going, "Oh, it's a witch hunt because I'm so vocal." No, it's because you allegedly had sex with a 17-year-old girl. That's a crime. And look, I know a lot of guys who if it were their 17-year-old daughter, you probably wouldn't have to worry about the federal government coming after you. Just saying. Also, some good news in Ohio. The Mark Ellis and his group, Democracy Docket, they have gotten the Ohio gerrymandered maps tossed out. That is a good thing because, as it was explained to me, Ohio is not a blue state by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably a 55-45 Republican state. But to get, I think someone said it was like 12 of the 14 or 12 of the 15 congressional seats were going to go their way. Some obscene number where you go, how is that even possible? And it's possible because you have a creative pencil. You can draw districts any way you want. And Ohio was very good at that. If you looked at some of the past maps, now they had passed a referendum a couple of years ago to not allow that to happen, and this is how this got chucked out. We'll see what happens next. The court evidently ordered the commission to adopt new ones, and they've got 10 days, I guess, to do that. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's a good step. It's a good sign. Somebody's paying attention, even in a dominant Republican state like Ohio. This story from Florida, again, a lot of stories from Florida. This one kind of made me laugh, kind of made me go, we're heading in dangerous territories, and kind of made me go, predictable. Liberals aren't going to take it anymore, or the left, or anyone for that matter. This guy named John Kotswanski. John was the Legislative Affairs Director for the State Board of Administration. Evidently, last week, John got into a fender bender where his BMW hit a white Prius. And evidently, as they pulled off to have whatever, discussion, we'll call the police, whatever, there was a confrontation. The guy in the Prius, I probably was not happy that the BMW, sideswiped him or knocked him into him, and evidently, confronted him, went back to his Prius, sat in the car, and this is when Koswanski decided that he was going to take his BMW and ram the Prius. And then, and this is the better part, ram the Prius and then, I guess, take his gun and shoot at the Prius. Now, this is where, they go, oh, crazy conservative, crazy Republican, crazy guy from Florida with a gun, yeah. Beating up on the poor little guy with the Prius. The Prius guy fired back. He drew his gun, shot through the windshield, and hit and killed Koswanski. And I go, I'm in this spot where I've been asking these questions for a while. With all these people carrying guns, because we're all going to protect ourselves, because we all think we're going to be victims. Is this normal? Is this what's going to happen? And, this clear-cut case, the guy in the Prius was defending himself. It's self-defense. He was let go eventually. They arrested him. They let him go. But is this where we're going? A minor traffic accident turns into people throwing shots at each other. And this is, kind of the question I have. And at what point does it end? And the other part of it is you go, a guy in a Prius is carrying a gun. Is that the new America? When the latte liberals start packing heat out of necessity, have we lost? I keep coming back to this. Now, his wife, Koswanski's wife, Rebecca, in a Twitter thread, said that she believed her husband was a victim, claimed he was trapped and assassinated by the person who shot him, and he was actually just trying to escape. And I love this kind of alternative reality where automatically you're going to assume, oh, no, no, he wouldn't do such a thing. Now you go, but anyone could snap. Well, evidently, when the newspaper, the Florida Politic, I guess it is, when they looked into it, evidently this Koswanski guy had pled no contest to assault and disorderly conduct charges back in 2014 in a separate road rage incident in the same intersection. Evidently, he had pulled a gun and pointed a gun at a motorist. It had a laser scope on it. And because that's what you do when you have a gun and you have a road rage incident. Now, I do find it interesting that the final tweet of Koswanski's Twitter account was an announcement that he had entered an online raffle that could win him $5,000 worth of firearms. May he rest in peace, and take his peace with him. Maybe I gotta wonder. This is one of those questions. If anyone has an answer, I want to know. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Should they bury his gun with him? I know there are people who can't leave the house without it. Gotta pack their heat. They can't feel safe without it, which I gotta tell you, I can't imagine living that kind of a paranoid life. But should they bury it with him? I think they should. I do. I think they should. I think it should go with him. That's simple for me. Some interesting stories coming out. You may remember I talked a lot about the Starbucks unionizing campaign that happened about a month ago, and how Starbucks had pulled out all of the stops, the threats, the intimidation, you name it. They had a big shindig where they pulled in executives. They had executives sweeping the floor. They did all kinds of stuff. Oh, we're all in this together. We're all partners. Don't vote for that evil union. It's all bad. Evidently, the folks over at More Perfect Union got a hold of an email that the company sent out to all of their employees, coming right out and saying, we want you to vote no on voting for the union. They write, there is no opt-out if the majority of voters vote yes, and my recommendation is to wait and see what happens in our one store in Buffalo. Negotiations can often take more than a year if a contract is reached at all. And I think it's worth waiting to see the results of their collective bargaining before making a decision that could have significant impact on you. In the meantime, I look forward to continuing our direct relationship. And you go, this is kind of one of those veiled kind of scenarios where they go, just wait and see what we do to them. Just wait and see how hard we make it on them. Just wait and see how we come in and we propose pay cuts and healthcare cuts and hour cuts and all the things that we're going to start off doing, that we're going to force them on strike. We're going to force them into a situation where they end up having to decertify because we're going to make their lives miserable. And this is why our labor laws are so badly broken, and why when Obama was running around the country going, we're going to get the Employee Free Choice Act. In fact, I say it all the time, shook his hand twice and looked him in the eyes and said, we getting that? And he goes, yeah, we're going to get something better. Both times. Got nothing. And in that Employee Free Choice Act, and I was not a huge fan. It was a step in the right direction. It was helpful. It wasn't the answer. It wasn't going to recreate the era of the 1940s and 50s and the kind of mass organizing that happened back then, but it was going to be helpful. And one of the things that was in that was a first contract arbitration. There were three main parts. There was the card checkpoint, where if you got 30% of the cards signed, you could trigger an election, or a company could voluntarily, which they still can do, recognize the union and bargaining begin. And you have quicker elections. There's that part of it. There's the part where first contract arbitration, and then there were the fines part, where if you break the rules, if you do something wrong, if there's an unfair labor practice, you're going to get socked with some fines. What Starbucks and companies like this know is they know that the penalties for doing this stuff are virtually non-existent. There's virtually nothing there. You might have to post the dreaded notice. Yeah, you might have to post a notice saying, hey, we promise to never do this again. Well, until the next time we get caught. So I'm assuming this is going to rise to that level. Eventually, a slap on the wrist will be found. But this is basically telling those Starbucks employees, don't vote for the union. Just wait and see how bad they get treated. See how we abuse them. And this is, again, why we need to have major comprehensive labor law reform. And you shouldn't have to go through this kind of a fight, through this kind of loop of obstacles, just to have rights on the job. You shouldn't have to. And you go, oh, but that's just low wage workers working, baristas working at a Starbucks. Except you look at Google, who evidently Google had a secret project to convince their workers that employees were horrible, or in their words, that unions suck. Yeah, Google. And Project Vivian, I believe the name was, ran from late 2018 till early 2020. And the goal was, go after those workers who were the activists, find them, weed them out, and then eventually, I believe, make examples of them. Now, what you've got, the director of employment law at Google, this guy named Michael File. He described, according to this article, Project Vivian as an initiative to engage employees more positively and convince them that unions suck. That's the goal. The goal was to find those people and hammer them out. They point out that in the January 7th ruling, the NLRB judge wrote Google must immediately produce 180 internal documents related to Project Vivian, including documents that this employment director laid out. Evidently, Google hasn't done anything yet. They've refused to hand over anything, and there's nothing coming. Evidently, the fired employees that filed a subpoena for these documents, because again, this is what they do. They find somebody, they fire them, they make an example out of them. There's a chilling effect, and everyone gets, I can't do this. And then they vote no, or they turn away. And they do this by design, because what Google and every other company knows, there are no penalties for this. Okay, so you fire somebody who works at Google. Let's say they make $100,000 a year. They go find another job. They make $90,000 a year. Okay, you're going to pay a $10,000 fine. Let's say they go make $110,000 a year. You don't pay anything. So what's the downside to breaking the law? What's the downside from doing this kind of stuff? There isn't any. And this is why, without question, we need to have major comprehensive labor law reform that takes into account that these companies, they don't care. The pendulum has swung too far. The pendulum has gone way too far to the side of employers. Way too far. And until somehow that starts to come back, and look, President Biden, I think, has done a good thing, and with the rhetoric and the words and some policy ideas, but you got to get something passed. And this is where it comes back to the Senate, the place where good ideas go to die. The PRO Act should be number 2 issue on the Democrats, on their agenda. You get the voting rights done, and you get the PRO Act done. You give workers the power to vote for your representatives, and you give them the power to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. You give them the power to have a say in their workplace. This is what the employer class, this is what the wealth class, this is what the rich folks are afraid of. They don't want empowered citizens. They certainly don't want empowered workers. Because if you feel some empowerment in the workplace, chances are you're going to feel some empowerment in society. And you're going to focus on the right things. What's interesting is the people screaming the loudest, the kooks out there, they feel empowered on conspiracy theory that, JFK Jr. is coming back. But you go, how do you do that? Instead of focusing on things that, how do we make people's lives better? How do we recreate an economy that works for everyone? How do we return to those ideals of that I grew up somewhat believing in, that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you got ahead, that there was opportunity for working people? Instead, what you've got people who, I got mine, the heck with you. And it's scary times. For me, all comes back down to policy. It is that simple. I'm going to take a quick break. You got any thoughts, questions, comments? I'd like to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. When we come back and talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, and that is buying American-made products. The job you may save could, quite frankly, be your own. When we come back and talk about American-made and why that should be the mantra going forward. Quick break, right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt established the National War Labor Board under Executive Order 9017. The board was designed to mediate and settle disputes in the various defense industries. Its purpose was to prevent any strikes or lockouts that would interfere with war production. The War Labor Board consisted of 12 representatives, 4 each from industry, labor, and the public. It established procedures for dispute resolution and detailed the scope of grievances, arbitration, and award enforcement. The board had the authority to issue binding agreements and to recommend government seizures of plants involved in work stoppages. It instituted the Little Steel formula to allow for cost of living increases in an effort to stem inflation. In exchange for the No Strike Pledge, it instituted maintenance of membership in unionized workplaces, which made union membership automatic for new hires and mandated employer collection of union dues. During the war, it imposed tens of thousands of wage dispute settlements and wage agreements. In a 1942 case against General Motors, the board mandated equal pay for equal work for women and minorities. Those critical of the board opposed the No Strike Pledge and compulsory arbitration as clampdowns on labor's power and independence. They argued it was stacked with open shop advocates, enforced wage controls and freezes, and encumbered workers with endless red tape, runarounds, and delays in resolutions. Labor historian Steve Frazier notes that after the 1942 elections, pro-business appointees made union organizing efforts throughout the South and in the retail and service sectors difficult. The board ceased its functions at the end of 1935, though it set precedents for arbitration that are still in use today. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So anybody who's listened to this show long enough knows I'm a huge supporter of the idea of domestic manufacturing, domestic production, domestic consumption. What we want, what we need, what we consume, what we buy, we should produce. This way, we create jobs for ourselves, we create jobs for our neighbors, and we also create quality products. You know, I was just having this conversation the other day. Manufacturing ran to China, and you know what ran with it? Quality. All we keep getting back is crap. So at some point, can we rebuild the economy that I grew up in, where the toys that I remember playing with as a kid were made in East Brattleboro, Vermont, or in Massachusetts or Chicago? I remember them being stamped on the bottom. And you know what? I still have some of those toys. My kids' toys of just a couple years ago, all broken. I think we can rebuild an economy based on American production, American consumption. And here to share some thoughts on how maybe we get there, I've asked Dan Brown Jr. to come talk with us. Dan is a campaign sponsor for We Want Made in USA consumer petition to Amazon. Also, he's part of the Loggerhead Tools Company, an American entrepreneur, businessman. Also, Instashield LLC, building some American-made PPE for folks here. Dan, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rick.
So let's jump right into this. Let's get into your background first. Loggerhead Tools, I've actually heard of, and I've actually heard really good things about it. And I'm still surprised that they're still made in the USA.
Yeah, so my father is an inventor. He's a professor at Northwestern, and we started the product called the Bionic Wrench, and it was been on TV for quite a while. It's part wrench, part pliers. When you squeeze the handles, 6 jaws come down and automatically find the right size. And so we've had huge success with our American-made products. And I run that company now. My dad's like I said, full-time professor at Northwestern. And then more recently we created, and they're all American-made products that are patented. And more recently we started Instashield. And right after the pandemic, because we didn't have enough PPE, because unfortunately most of that comes from China and other places, we created a face shield that easily fits on any size baseball cap. And within 6 months, we sold 1 million face shields, and we donated 1 million face shields, and we sold them very affordably in order to fill the PPE gap.
No, and it's what we needed at the time, and what we need still more of, because we still can't find decent PPE in this country. And it's, again, one of the failures of our production system, especially as we've allowed manufacturing to go overseas. So in talking about this campaign you've moved forward on, we want things made in the U.S., and it's something I've been talking about for years. What made you jump into this? I mean, obviously your business interests, but beyond that, what made you jump into this?
Well, I mean, this is something I'm super passionate about, and it's very frustrating when you try to buy American-made products. I mean, we're all busy. We've got families or jobs or whatever. It should be very simple to find American-made products. And when you look at Amazon, Amazon has made shopping so simple. I could go buy a toothbrush on Amazon right now, have it delivered tomorrow morning, and they're not going to charge me shipping, right? So if they can do that, I don't see why they can't make it easy for us to easily search for and find American-made products. So if you're looking for an American-made gift, or if you just want to compare options to say, okay, I want a wrench. So I type in wrench, and then you can type in on the left-hand side, there's a filter. So you can filter any search on Amazon by a star rating, if you're looking for a certain price point, or if you're looking for brands. And all we're asking is that they add a country of origin filter. So that Made in USA button, you'd press that, type in wrench, and all the top listings would be Made in USA wrenches. And so now you're an informed customer, and now you can say, okay, here are the American-made options, and now I can compare it to the other options that would normally show up if I use no filter. And I think what this would do is allow people to really see, okay, what are my American-made options? And, therefore also increase people buying Made in USA. And I think that consumers need to be buying more Made in USA in order for us to rebuild our US manufacturing base. And I think there's a huge amount of people that want to do this, but they need somewhere to be able to do it. And so we're asking Amazon to do this, and they already have all of the country of origin information for every single listing.
Yeah, no, it's one of these things that I've talked about for years. Every Christmas I come around and say, we're looking for American-made gifts. We're looking for American-made anything. And usually when I find something, I'll come on the show and I'll talk about it. And it used to be where you had the choice. You'd have a couple of different things on the shelf. You could flip it over. You can find it. It's now to the point where I go to the hardware store, I go anywhere. You can't find anything made in the USA anymore. It's just not there. Either they're not carrying it because they have very limited shelf space, or it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm not sure which is more accurate, that they don't want to carry it or it's just not there anymore.
Well, I call on all the major retailers, and what's so unfortunate is that a few people, a few of these buyers at these major retailers decide everything you see at the point of sale, let's say at Walmart, Home Depot, or Lowe's, and they have outsized power, and they just care about their bottom line, I think. And they're mainly buying stuff on price. And so, they don't really care, I don't think, how long it lasts, or, like you're talking about those Christmas toys, that the ones you have are still working, but the ones you bought for your kids recently, they're not. And so we're allowing a few people to decide all of these products and where they're manufactured. And so they pressure these suppliers to get their prices so low that eventually they have to go to China, if they haven't gone already, in order to keep that business. And so it's really taking the option away from us, the consumers, to buy American-made products. And that's why I think Amazon, where more and more people are shopping, if we give people this option, I think it's such a large platform and it's such a small change for Amazon, it can make a big difference in the American manufacturing community.
It could, but could it also, because I'm going through what you're talking about, the big box retailers and the people who decide to put things on the shelves. And I know Amazon has a lot of preferred sellers and a lot of preferred products. Would this potentially interfere with how they're making their money off of their preferred products by putting American-made products in front of me? Because there's no question I'm going to buy it every time.
Well, I think that what I would say is just offer the search functionality. Not everyone has to use it. If you want to use it, you can, and then you press that button and it goes there. Otherwise, maintain the regular search, SEO that they normally have, right, but give the option.
But, I have my free market friends who love to say, well, the market will decide this stuff, Rick. The consumers have decided all of this stuff. And I go, no, I don't think they have, because they haven't been given the choice. There are a lot of really good reasons why we should be having really strong Buy American provisions in our government procurement and also in our household buying. Can you walk me through some of the ideas on why this could be good for our economy, why it's good for families, and why maybe paying the extra buck for a wrench is a good thing for society as a whole?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first and the biggest thing is that we need to create more high-paying quality jobs. I believe that the best social system is a good-paying job. So number one, jobs. And you know what? All politicians talk about creating jobs. And yet, it's just a talking point. I don't really think they care too much about it. They just like to say it because it polls well. But this creates jobs. But then on top of that, you hear about, and these are unfortunate things, sometimes coming out of China, you see the headlines of tainted dog food or drywall that releases, gases that are hurt. The safety regulations are not there. We are laundering in products that don't pass safety regulations, that they're not, we are very naive. When we buy something, sometimes on these platforms, we assume that someone checked them, but that's not the case, because if they do sell tainted dog food or something like that, and I'm not trying to say it's all like that, but when that happens, no one goes to jail in China. If that happens in the United States, that's a big difference. So I think what's going on is not enough people are understanding that, when you're getting these products from China, they're not always, they're definitely not the quality. Now, some of it can be, but they're not always. But I think the biggest thing is jobs. Why not keep that money here, circulate that money here, and just, we can continuously have better jobs. Look at what's going on in Chicago. We need to have more jobs here, more opportunity for people to climb the economic ladder.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Dan Brown Jr. He's one of the main campaign sponsors for We Want Made in the USA, consumer petition to Amazon. Is there a way that we can get involved in that, Dan? Is there a way we can push? I know you've got a website, wewantmadeinusa.com. We'll get links out on social media. Is there a way for us to push this to make Amazon aware that this is something we want?
Yeah, I mean, so the first thing would be to go to wewantmadeinusa.com, sign that petition, share it with your family and friends. And this is kind of the mission I'm doing outside of the business, is going around talking about this. And I think that this is a simple ask for Amazon. And I think if enough people sign it, we can get them to do it. So yeah, if you can push this and share this, that'd be fantastic. And it's just a common sense thing. And as consumers, this is something that is a simple search tool. And the fact that they don't have it actually makes me wonder why. But that could be a different conversation.
Yeah, there's a whole conversation around that. And look, I'm someone who believes our trade policy is big in the problems of where we are. The fact that we allowed so many U.S. companies to race over for cheap labor and lax environmental regulations, and also that China rips us off at every turn and then sends their stuff back here to compete with American companies without any recourse whatsoever. And this is something I'm sure that you guys deal with, because I seem to remember having your father on the program a number of years ago, now that I'm thinking about it, talking about this very topic. Because at the time, if I remember, didn't someone try to knock off your main production piece?
Yeah. So Sears knocked off our American-made Bionic Wrench. We've sold over 3 million. Patented product, 100% made in the United States. Sears knocked it off, slapped the Craftsman name on it, made it in China, and even kind of basically copied our commercial. And so that's another organization that I'm part of, is US Inventor, usinventor.org. And these go hand in hand, because if you cannot enforce your intellectual property in the United States, then what's going to happen is that people will not make their products here. Because if you do, you get a target on your back, because you have these fast followers and basically con artists that they can't create anything. So they just steal people's stuff. So they'll take your product, they'll go to China or somewhere else, and then bring it here, dump it in the market at a lower price. And that's called efficient infringement, because there's no teeth in the patent law. And so therefore, if they get caught, they don't get in trouble barely. They may pay a little bit of money to you, but that's if you have a lot of money to go after them and you want to spend 5 to 10 years in the court system. So basically, the two things I think that we need to do to help rebuild U.S. manufacturing bases: one, make it easier for consumers to find and buy American products. And that's what I think this Amazon petition does. And the second thing is, big tech and giant corporations have lobbied Congress successfully to weaken patent laws. They've passed some bad laws, and we also have had some Supreme Court rulings that do not help inventors and small businesses. And so we need to fight back. And US Inventor, which I work with, we're fighting back. They are the We the People lobbyists to try to make sure that we can get our patent system restored. Because right now, the way I see it going is we're going to have a bunch of tech oligarchs where we get everything from, because they are the ones that are changing the patent system. Because think about it, Google, they started in a garage. They had patents. They became one of the most powerful companies in the world. Now they don't want people to have those patents, because guess what? That's their competition. And, it sounds evil, and maybe that, people might not believe that's possible, but this is what's happening. The Congress is not hearing enough voices from everyday working people, and they need to hear more. So I would say two things that would be very helpful is go to wewantmadeinusa.com, sign this petition. I think this Amazon thing is a simple thing. I think we will get it done, and it can make a huge difference. And the other thing is, get involved with US Inventor. And it could just be a simple phone call to your local representative saying, hey, we want to make the patent rights restored to what they were 10, 15 years ago. The patent system worked. It's currently not working, and it's working for big tech. And so at usinventor.org, there's an inventors' rights resolution. You could sign that. And I think that those two things, easy to do, and we can really start to fight back so that we're not buying everything from a few tech overlords in the future here.
Or from Chinese knockoffs. Look, we had a guy, his family came up with the Navy chair back in the 30s and 40s, and the Chinese built the exact same chair, half price, basically put them out of business, and there was no repercussion whatsoever. Because again, we're not told where things are from. We don't have the right to know at this point. And I think there should be country of origin labels on everything so that you do have the right to know. And you're right. I think Amazon could do this. It could be very simple, and it could be helpful to our economy in many ways of creating jobs and getting people like me the ability to buy things that are made in the U.S. because I think that's extremely important. In fact, I think most people do believe that. Have you guys done any polling on the percentage of Americans who want to buy American-made products? I know my friend Scott Paul over at the Alliance for American Manufacturing, they do this, a whole bunch of stuff, and it's usually in the 70 and 80% range.
Yeah, and that was a great interview. I watched that yesterday. Yeah, I think you guys said it was 80%. People want to do this, and you know what? Just having the ability to do a side-by-side, sometimes things aren't that much more expensive. And so if we can have a more informed consumer and giving them the option to see, it can't hurt. And I think what's going to happen is that people will say, you know what, and just make it a go, right? So ABC World News did a study. They said if every American spent an additional $64 on American-made goods, it would create an additional 200,000 jobs. So this, to me, is a no-brainer. And I really hope people can see that creating good jobs, especially where you have some communities, they just need opportunity. And, and to climb the economic ladder, and the patent part is all about the American dream too. We need to make it so that people can rise up the economic ladder and to move up the ladder. And a lot of that is intellectual property rights. So if you come up with a great idea, and if it's new, novel, non-obvious, and you can get a patent, that's your ticket to starting a business and being able to get funding and to move on and hopefully be one of these giant companies, right? They can put a dent in the world and change things.
There you go. Dan, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Good stuff. I hope folks will check out the website. WeWantMadeInUSA.com is the site. We'll get that out on social media. Dan Brown Jr., I appreciate the time, man.
Thank you so much, Rick. Take care.
Good stuff. Again, make sure you check out that website. Also, loggerheadtools.com and InstashieldUSA.com. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at that stuff. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1942. That was the day that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt reestablished the National War Labor Board, just a little over a month before the United States had entered World War II. In the days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Congress voted to join the global conflict. Soon after the war was declared, the president brought together representatives from both business and labor. The president won commitments of no strikes or lockouts during the conflict. He wanted further assurances, however, that the great industrial war machine would continue to run smoothly. He looked back on how labor disputes were handled during World War I as a model. During that earlier global conflict, President Woodrow Wilson had set up a National War Labor Board. President Roosevelt kept the same name for his board, but charged it with even more sweeping powers. The board consisted of 12 members, 4 from labor, 4 from business, and 4 from the general public. But the overall composition of those selected tilted in favor of business. Any labor dispute that might impact the war effort was sent before the board. Since practically the entire United States economy was part of the war engine, this gave the group significant power. In establishing the board, President Roosevelt declared, "The national interest demands that there shall be no interruptions of any work which contributes to the effective prosecution of the war." The board played a decisive role in setting wages for many workers during the war. Labor protested the hardship of stagnant wages, as the raises determined by the board did not keep up with the cost of living, as prices were driven up by wartime scarcities. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you may remember a couple weeks ago, we had an expert on talking about education, and what had happened is here in my state of Pennsylvania, there's some litigation going on about school funding and education, where you're getting these superintendents coming in and they're presenting their case on why they either need more funding or don't, and some of the testimony that's gotten and some of the questions that's gotten attention, or at least caught my attention initially, was the question of what use would a carpenter have for biology, and what use would someone on the McDonald's career track have for Algebra 1? And it kind of reminded me back of 100 years ago, where the robber barons of that era, said things like, too much education could spoil a child for work. Someone actually said that. And it made me go, I think we're going on the really wrong track, which is why I'm interested to see where this lawsuit is going. And that's why I've asked Deborah Gordon Klehr to come talk with us. Deborah is the executive director of the Education Law Center, PA. FundOurSchoolsPA.org is their website. Also, ELC-PA.org. We'll get links out on social media, so you don't have to worry about that. But Deborah, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me, Rick.
So I'll tell you, it caught my attention, and I think it caught a lot of people's attention. When you've got a superintendent being asked, why does someone who's going to be a carpenter, what are they going to do with biology? What's that kid who's going to go work at a McDonald's who's got no future? Why do they need algebra? I think that made a lot of people kind of sit up and go, wait a second, isn't education the thing that's supposed to help us not be on those tracks and try and do better? And even if we are on those tracks, make us better citizens? Am I missing something?
Well, this is ongoing litigation, so I'm not going to come in on the other attorneys' arguments, but I will tell you that you're right that all children in Pennsylvania have the right to a high-quality public education. Right. This isn't just your opinion or my opinion. It's the law written into the state constitution in the 1870s. The General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education to serve the needs of the Commonwealth. That's the Education Clause. And in Pennsylvania, not every child gets the resources they need. The state, our leaders, are severely shortchanging students in low wealth school districts across the state, including where most of our Black and Brown students live. It's not just a few schools. It's not just in one part. It's rural, urban, suburban, all over Pennsylvania.
No, and this is where, I get into these conversations where whenever you start talking about funding formulas and you start talking about, what you've said, everyone immediately thinks Philadelphia. And I say, well, Philadelphia's got its problems, but so does every rural school district in this Commonwealth, all 67 counties, all 500 school districts. Most of them have funding problems, and it could be your kid that's being shortchanged as well, which is why we should have a much more fair system of funding education. Or that's just my thought.
That's right. It's a statewide problem. So most districts have an adequacy gap, a gap between what they get per student and what they would need just to have an adequate education based on the state's own calculations from a number of years ago. The state needs to update that, but in the meantime, using those numbers, we know that there is a $4.6 billion gap between what our districts need and what they have, and that's in all districts. It's Lancaster, it's $4,500 per student gap. Shenandoah Valley, over $7,000 per student gap. This is statewide.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to me. And, I look at, some of the things that we've heard from some of the school districts, one of the things that shocked me is, like kindergartners don't get any recess time. They don't have enough teachers. You're lacking, athletic programs in districts where that's something that would bring kids to school. And that's personal for me because I've said it, a bunch of times. The only reason I finished high school was because there was an athletic program. I played football and I played basketball and baseball and hockey and all that stuff. That was the only thing that got me to get up every day and go to school because my life was in chaos as a teenager. So, I know there are people like that need these programs, and we're defunding it, especially in vulnerable places that need it the most.
That's right. I think that's the experience of a lot of students, Rick, like you, where they really connect to school through athletics or sports. And in many districts, we heard testimony from an athletic director in one of our petitioner school districts, and saw pictures of the quote gym. This is not where we would want our children to be learning. These are not conditions where kids have the opportunities they deserve. And we've heard testimony in court, and I can tell you a little bit more about the case, but we've heard testimony from superintendents and teachers, athletic director, and others, all talking about those conditions that you reference, really disturbing pictures of the way that inadequate and inequitable funding impacts our students.
Now, we have 500 school districts, as I said. I think it's still 500. Used to be 501. Somehow one merged with another. We're down to now 500 in 67 counties across the Commonwealth. And I argue this is made up strictly on ways of excluding others from different districts and slicing things in ways that, well, we've got ours, kind of like a Hunger Games kind of scenario. Am I off base?
Well, the Hunger Games is something we've talked about in another context, which is there are two main problems with our funding system. One is, how big is the pie? We need to grow it. And how do you distribute it? So we talk about adequacy is how big is it? And equity, how do you distribute it? And if you're only talking about redistributing what we currently have today without addressing the adequacy gap, it is Hunger Games, because you're redistributing too small of an amount to adequately meet districts' needs. So maybe you could make it fairer, but certainly not fair unless you grow that pie. We are $4.6 billion short of what our districts need. And so just redistributing it, it does put us in a Hunger Games situation. We need to increase the pie, increase the dollars going to public schools all over the state, and in most of our districts are underfunded.
And how much of this stuff is coming out in this trial? Because, I think for a lot of people, this is the first time they're hearing that this is going on. I guess let's start with who brought the suit and what's the goal of what's being sought?
Thanks. So my organization, the Education Law Center of Pennsylvania, along with another public interest organization called the Public Interest Law Center, two of our nonprofit organizations, as well as a private law firm pro bono called O'Melveny, brought this case. We filed it over 7 years ago, and we filed it on behalf of 6 school districts, geographically diverse across the state. The Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools, the NAACP Pennsylvania State Conference, and families whose children attend underfunded and under-resourced schools. And we brought this case against state leaders for failure to fund public education adequately or equitably in violation of the state constitution.
And what's the hope that we get out of this? I mean, I have my views on what I would like to see. I think it only makes sense that you have one giant funding pot and it's distributed equally. This way you've got the richest and the poorest. And what we know in a situation like that is rich people don't want their kids to have anything less than the absolute best. So, if you've got one giant pot, I think we all do better. So what's the goal in this, do you think?
Our vision is that we want all students in Pennsylvania to have meaningful opportunities to learn and thrive, just like students in well-funded districts have now. This is about providing opportunities having the state step up and do its job to adequately and equitably fund our schools.
And what does that mean? I hear that a lot. What does that mean? I mean, I know there are school districts in this state that, per child funding somewhere in the 20 plus $1,000 range. And there are some that are what, 8, 9, 6, something. I mean, we're talking different worlds.
There's huge disparities. And in fact, the gap between the wealthiest and least wealthy districts is $4,800 per student and growing. Now multiply that by 5,000 kids in a district, 22,000 kids in a district, 200,000 kids in a district. These are huge, huge gaps. And so ultimately, the way that schools are funded and all over is through local dollars, state dollars, and federal dollars. Federal dollars make up a very small amount. So in most states, you're looking at the distribution between state share and local share. And Pennsylvania actually ranks 45th in the nation in terms of state share, which is bad, which means we're overly reliant on local wealth. And that's what creates the inequities, because if you're so reliant on local share, then you're looking at local property values. And you take a district like William Penn Area School District, one of our petitioner school districts, they tax themselves at a very high rate. Their tax effort is really high, but their tax capacity is very low. So in a more progressive state, the state would provide more funds for that district, accounting for the fact that they have a lot of students with high needs, and they don't have the local wealth to fund their schools.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems, it's crazy to me. And I lived through the Corbett years here where we were slashing education funding, and it always seems to be that one place where, we take the budgets out so we can give big tax breaks to corporations and so, and such. Where do you see this going? I know you're following this day to day. Where do you see this going?
Well, in the immediate future, we start back up again tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. in Commonwealth Court in Harrisburg, and you can actually live stream the trial at fundourschoolspa.org/trial. I'm sure you'll put that on social media, and you can live stream it. And so in the immediate future, we encourage people to watch, to see the evidence in court. We expect to go into February. Today marks the 2-month anniversary since opening arguments, and will continue through into February. We are asking the judge to rule the system unconstitutional. We're not saying that she should say, and the number is 4.6 billion, and here's exactly how you should distribute it, but rather to say this is unconstitutional, and order the legislature to fix it, and order the legislature to adequately and equitably fund schools. And that, will be the next step. There may be an appeal to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court along the way, but ultimately, we really believe this is the opportunity. This is landmark, historic litigation, and this is really an opportunity to change the trajectory for generations of Pennsylvania students.
No, it's important, without question, especially, I grew up in a housing project, so I know what the lower end of the education system can look like, and how opportunity isn't there for, especially, the lower income folks. But I now live in a rural community where they don't have the tax base either. So, it's not just those people in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh. It's all across the Commonwealth, and it's something that we need to do. But here's my problem. In a functional democracy, we don't have this problem. But we've got one of the parties, and you don't have to go here with me because I'm going here myself. We've got a political party in this country that wants to privatize and destroy public education. And I believe that's a big part of the problem we're in, where we keep trying all these gimmicks that keep taking money out of the public schools' coffers and trying these cyber charters and all this stuff that have been failures and have cost us billions of dollars that we could have used in a much more thorough and efficient way that we haven't done. And again, just my opinion.
I think the attacks on public education in so many different areas. I mean, this is about fair funding, but I'm sure you've had segments focusing on critical race theory and school board meetings and book censorship, and I think the attacks on our students and our public schools coming from all places.
Yeah, I wish we could get people that upset about the school funding issue and opportunities that, I think what the opportunities I had in high school that kids today don't have because we've defunded our schools. It's terrible. I wish you guys the best. I hope you'll come back and keep us updated on what's going on, and maybe on the other side a victory that can be celebrated.
I look forward to celebrating.
Good stuff, Deborah. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Deborah Gordon Klehr, she is the executive director of the Education Law Center PA. You can check out their website at elc-pa.org. We'll get links out on social media on how you can take a look at that. Also, make sure you check out the website fundourschoolspa.org. I highly suggest it, and follow along. Maybe you get to see the trial going on. And like I said, at the end of this, you get one shot at an education. I mean, that's the reality in all this. You get one time, and kids get one shot to get this. And if they don't have the best opportunities, if they don't get that one shot, their entire lives are going to be much harder. And I think back to some of the cyber charter schools and the scams and the schemes that I've seen over the years, and you go, yeah, these criminals, some of them went to jail, some of them got fined. But what about those kids who didn't get those years of education that are then dumped back into the public schools and the remedial education that has to happen that never does? There are numerous studies out there that say you lose a child by third grade, you probably never get them back on track. There's that one study, I think it's from Indiana, that showed the classroom, the prison pipeline. They could actually figure out in second grade the number of kids that were going to be going into the jail system because they didn't get an education. It's just, for me, this is one of those key issues that every parent, that every one of us, every taxpayer should care about. That we have a system that really doesn't do a really great job of doing the things that we need. I hope they do well. Again, check out the website, fundourschoolspa.org, if you want to take a look at what goes on. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, download the podcast. That's right, download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com, or get the smartphone get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Make sure you follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Subscribe, like, share, all of that. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Corporate America has proudly elevated good moral values to a special place. That place is the trash can. Indeed, free market gurus assert that the only ethical obligation a corporation has to society is to deliver as much profit as possible to its big investors. Everybody else be damned. And they excuse any awfulness they cause by claiming that they, quote, broke no laws. But hello, they write the laws, so corporate immorality is always technically legal. America experienced this corporate dodge just before Christmas, when a line of supercell tornadoes ripped through the Midwest, demolishing buildings and whole towns, killing more than 90 people. It was called a tragedy, but those deaths were not destiny. We're not helpless in the face of tornado fury, for an effective, cheap defense is readily available. Safe rooms. Built inside schools, factories, shopping centers, and other buildings, people can safely shelter there during big blows, surviving even if the building around them is shredded. They've been proven to provide, quote, near absolute protection from tornadoes, and it's long been proposed to amend building codes to require them in new commercial and public buildings. Such a provision would have saved many workers who were crushed inside an Amazon warehouse, a candle-making factory, and other buildings destroyed by December storms. But they died because members of a little-known industry-controlled group, the International Code Council, had quietly vetoed the proposal, calling it overly restrictive and even declaring it's way too soon to do a knee-jerk reaction to tornado deaths. This is Jim Hightower saying all those buildings smashed by December's tornadoes were corporate death sites because their shoddy construction broke no laws. Let's ask corporate America if it's still too soon for Congress to mandate tornado-safe rooms. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is brought to you by the Lowdown Happy Hour, live streamed from the Chat and Chew Cafe. Details at hightowerlowdown.org.